Far More Than We Think, Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 52. No News is Good News. I used to be an avid reader of newspapers and a regular consumer of TV news, and I had an opinion about everything and everybody. In my new spiritual way of life, I rarely buy a newspaper or watch TV. This is partly because it no longer interests me, but also because I now see the mass media in a very different light. Many of us are already aware of the unreliability and cutthroat nature of the media industry, yet we continue to support it by eagerly consuming all that it has to offer. There are pros and cons for the media, of course, but overall I now see far more harm than good. The first obvious point is that mass media is big business, and we inevitably have ego-driven competition. The name of the game is to sell as many newspapers as possible or attract the largest audience. Sensationalist reporting is a key weapon in the battle of the media giants, and dramatic stories are at a premium. Unscrupulous practices are deployed in order to try to beat the competition, and consequently the boundaries between valid investigative journalism and unsavoury invasion of privacy have become blurred and are often overstepped. Facts become distorted and stretched in order to make a good story, and the net result can be quite misleading. When we add politically motivated editorial influence into the mix, we basically end up being fed a range of ego-driven opinions rather than objective news. We then filter these representations of news through our own belief systems, and what we eventually perceive as reliable data has the capacity to be very different from the objective truth. The next point is that there is a tendency for the news to be overwhelmingly negative. We are mainly offered a diet of war, poverty, disaster, disagreement, crime, injustice, dishonesty, disgrace, calamity, immorality, and general suffering. Or we are fed salacious gossip about so-called celebrities. Admittedly, this is offset by art and sports and a handful of more positive stories, but overall I do not see a sense of balance. Little or none of this news is of any real relevance to our day-to-day lives, yet we allow ourselves to be bombarded by negativity on a daily basis. The underlying theme of much of this news is fear, and this creates an atmosphere in which the individual and collective ego thrives. We see a dangerous and unjust world where fame, fortune, and a strong ego are deemed desirable, and this strongly influences how we relate to our fellow human beings. We are variously fearful, indignant, or envious of others, and the net result is that the news reinforces our ego and keeps us away from spirituality. To my mind, the mass media is a reflection of our society in general, and the picture that emerges is overwhelmingly one of ugliness rather than beauty. It's an image of ego rather than spirit. Given that the media industry mainly works on the basis of making money, the rather sobering thought arises that it's we as consumers who support the businesses and are driving their direction. The circulation figures and viewing statistics are comprised of us. Not only are we being influenced and exploited by our consumption of mass media, we are the driving force behind its existence in the first place. If we were to take less of an unhealthy interest in the suffering of others, the news industry would have to correct the imbalances. In basic terms, if we stopped buying negative messages, such negativity would eventually cease to be of any value. We may worry that non-consumption of news would leave us without any knowledge of what is happening in the world, but for me, That has not felt like a major handicap. The media only reports a tiny fraction of what's really going on out there anyway. Suffering and injustice in the world are largely caused by ego, and this is not relevant for me unless I'm specifically going to do something about it. If I want to become more aware of a specific issue, I can always find out for myself. I don't wish to be fed a diet of what others consider important, and I no longer consider supporting and financing an unreliable and self-serving media industry to be a good use of my personal time or resources. It seems there are plenty more positive things to do in life. The media industry can be rather unhelpful when it comes to right-sizing our fear-based egos. The easy solution is to stop polluting our minds with negativity. It may seem unconventional, but it makes sense to me. Just because something is conventional does not mean that it's in our best interests. If we follow the crowd, we will end up going wherever the crowd is going. Mass media messes with the mind. Ignoring the mass media works in our favour, because we can then base our lives on reliable observations of our own experience, rather than allowing our minds to be manipulated by fear. If we feed ourselves fear, we will continue to be fearful. If we feed ourselves love, we will more likely grow and flourish. My personal view is that no news is good news when it comes to spiritual growth.